Hello. This session is to discuss the new interim claim form for high-cost special education aid. To provide a little background, federal IDEA discretionary funds were formerly used to supplement the program, but they are no longer being provided. DPI has been revising our administrative rule, PI 30, as a result. Finally, the old high-cost application through the former special education portal is obsolete and has been decommissioned. Our goals behind this revision are first, to have less of a need for DPI to make judgment calls about whether or not a particular cost or group of students should be eligible. Second, to make more use of our existing DPI data collections. And finally, to have more equity in administering the program by removing some of the judgment and subjective criteria that have been involved in some discussions about eligible cost. So our new claim form is Excel-based. Because it is Excel-based and contains protected student information, claims must be submitted through our secure email system, which is called KiteWorks. Claims submitted through regular email will be deleted upon receipt without being read. In order to get access to KiteWorks, you must email Rosalind Bidorf at the email address on the screen, and she will set you up with access. In the new claim form, there are 3 different categories of costs for high-cost special ed aid. There are direct child-specific or student costs, such as one-on-one aids, placements with tuition, and so on. There are program-level costs. These are things like transition programs, speech or language therapy, and then there are specified services or non-administrative pupil services, such as psychology or health. The new claim form is an Excel document with a number of tabs. The first tab is the applicant roster. On the applicant roster, you will select the LEA and the contact information, and then you will provide basic information for each student in the claim. Let's go to the claim form and take a look at how this works. The Excel claim form has some introductory information, some important notes, and some instructions on how to use the form. Tabs are located along the bottom. First tab, as I mentioned, is the applicant roster. In this presentation, I have a lot of test information entered into the form. This will also be included in the download. Please make sure to delete this test data once you complete the form. The applicant LEA is a selection with a drop-down that has all Wisconsin LEAs in the menu. When you pick one, the district code will populate, as will some other data, which we'll go through in a minute. You'll need to enter the name, title, and contact information for an applicant. Then you will enter in this area your individual students who are claiming for high cost. The claim is driven off of the WISE ID. You will need this, and in the future, claims will be made directly connecting to WISE data using the WISE ID. For now, though, the WISE ID does need to be entered in the Excel doc. We have last and first name, date of birth, grade, primary disability identification, which is based on the WISE data disability reporting codes. And then you'll need the number of days enrolled. I'll point out that in a number of these column headers, there are these small red arrows. When you mouse over them, it displays a comment field. In this case, the comment field is stating that when you're entering days enrolled, do not include ESY, extended school year, or other summer or interim session days. So we have students that were enrolled for the entire school year, and we have students that were enrolled for a portion of a school year. The second section of the claim form is to enter equipment for the purpose of determining depreciation. This is a change from the way high cost was formerly administered. Equipment costs are not claimed fully in the year they are purchased. Instead, depreciation, which we are defining as 20% of the purchase price of a piece of equipment over a period of 5 years, which is called a 5-year straight line depreciation in accounting speak. For each of those 5 years, the equipment cost can be eligible if it is used by a high-cost student or program. One caveat is that the item of equipment must have been used 100% for special education and related services since it was purchased. The information that you will need to provide for the equipment includes both a description, the serial number or vehicle identification number, and the original date of purchase. As I said, a piece of equipment can be associated with a student or with a program. To show an example, on the equipment depreciation tab, we have a changing table, which is used for a student. I've entered the WISE ID in this column, which has brought up their name. This is the description, the serial number, and the date purchased. I also have a drop down here to select the woofer function. Some of these are at a less detailed level than is required for DPI reporting or maybe on your books. But in this case, I've selected 214,000 for health. You may make a different determination depending on how the equipment is coded in your district. And then because this is a large piece of equipment, we paid for it with local dollars, I've put $8,000 in this other local project 019. There are 4 different columns for defining how costs are recorded. Over here on the right, you can see that it has taken 20% of that number to give an eligible depreciation of $1,600. Same way, we have a movable pool lift, but this time I've put it in with an adaptive FIED program, and we'll talk about how those programs are entered in a little bit. But this PEID links to the next tab with the adaptive FIED program. Again, I picked the function, entered a cost, and it's calculating 20%, excuse me. One thing to note is that if you try to enter a date that is more than 5 years ago, it'll give you a little pop-up error. The next type of cost is a program cost, and programs are probably the most complicated and difficult to understand piece of the new claim form, so we're going to spend some time on it. A program is a set of special education and related services for children identified with the same disability-related needs. So a transition service program with an instructor and perhaps some students, perhaps some costs related to life skills instruction, other things, that is a program. If you have a cross-categorical instruction program, perhaps housed in a classroom in your school, that cross-categorical instruction is a program. Rather than including fractions of staff or having discussions about how many students are a small enough group to be reported to high cost, we're moving to this model of a program where you can enter, allocate a cost for a program in a few different ways and include that with your claim, or you don't. Each program, each cost for a program is entered on its own line. Every cost of a program is going to have the same ID and title, and those are used to link with other tabs on the worksheet. For example, I have a number of different programs entered on the sample form. I have speech and language, which I've given the ID of SL. We have Crosscat Classroom with an ID of CC. We have adaptive FIED, occupational therapy, specialized bus route to ODTC. And then I've added another cost down here for adaptive FIED. That's fine. Costs don't have to be consecutive or any particular order. As long as they have the same ID, those costs will be combined when we get to the student cost step. This adaptive FIED for the pool lift, this is the same that was entered on the previous tab. Cost description should include the type of cost. The types of costs that are able to be claimed as a program are salary, benefits, purchase services, transportation, supplies, and depreciation. You'll need to provide a description of the cost. If it is staff, it should include the position and description. If it's equipment, it should have the description copied over from the equipment tab. Cost description includes woofer function, and again, this is at the same 3-digit level. We also have a field to enter the license number for licensed staff associated with the program. Going back to the funding sources, costs are reported depending on whether they fall into one of 4 funding sources. Is the cost directly aid eligible for special ed and school age parents aid to your district or your LEA? This would be what we call a Project 011 cost. For those few districts that are involved in what are called package programs, this also includes costs coded with Project 091 or 092. There are aid eligible costs that you're purchasing from a CISA or another district or a CCDEB. On your books, those are Project 019 costs because they're not directly aidable to you, but the other district CISA or CCDEB will owe you a transitive aid back on that cost. Those are also aid eligible for the high cost purposes. Otherwise, the cost can be an other local cost, which is under Project 019, or it could be a grant funded cost, be that a federal, state, or privately funded grant. So as you can see, we have 4 columns here. The staff costs I've pretty well entered as the Project 011 aid eligible cost. I do have here occupational therapy, 50% purchased from CISA. So that is going in. I've got the salary and benefit portion of the bill from CISA under Project 019 with the 380 object. 380 objects mean other districts, CISAs, CCDEBs, and other agencies. I also have the CISA overhead charge here under other local Project 019 because that portion is not eligible for aid. And then in this example, bus route to and from ODTC for 2 students, I've said for this claim purposes that cost is split between grant funded and locally funded aid eligible. Now the next piece is the program enrollment, and these are used to determine an average daily FTE and get to a daily rate for each program. That is how costs are transferred from the program level to the individual student. To reduce confusion about how FTEs are collected, the FTE calculation has been broken down into its individual parts on the claim form. The first part is the unit of service. This is how you are going to allocate a program cost among the individual students in your district or LEA. We have 4 ways to do this. The first one is by minutes. So for a service like speech or language, where you have on the IEP specifying a certain number of minutes of service, and those services are generally provided 1 student at a time, these would be the kinds of things most appropriate to use a minute unit of service for. We have periods available, class periods. So if you have a high school transition class that meets, let's say, 2 periods out of 7 in a day, you can select periods as the unit of service for that. We have days. A service like a specialized morning and afternoon bus route for students whose IEPs require them to be transported separately from their peers. Those generally don't change day to day in terms of their duration or attendance. It's just a morning and afternoon bus route every day. In that case, the unit of service appropriate would be days. Finally, if your data do not support the ability to allocate costs at one of the other levels, you are permitted to select caseload as the unit of service. In that case, the cost will be allocated evenly by the individual students served by the program. Once you've selected a unit of service, you need to enter the number of students who are served per unit. For costs using minutes, this is usually going to be 1. Again, this is your speech and language type service where kids are served 1 at a time. For periods, this is going to be the average number of kids who are in the classroom in any given period. So if you have 2 sections of a transition class, 1 section has 4 kids, 1 section has 6 kids, the average of 4 and 6 is 5. 5 is what you would enter as students per unit. For days or for caseload, you would just enter the total number of students being served by this particular program. The third piece is to enter how many units of service there are per day. For minutes, that's going to depend on the daily schedule. So it could be the number of minutes in a day. It could be the number of minutes in a day less an individual's prep time. That's going to depend on what's entered. For periods, this is the number of periods that the class or the program is held, not the total number in a school day. Going back to our transition example, the number of units per day is 2 rather than 7, because we said the transition class was meeting for 2 of 7 periods. Days or caseload, units per day is always going to be 1. It's going to be read as 1 no matter what you entered, so just enter 1 for days or caseload. Finally, enter the number of days of the program. If a program occurs every day for the entire school year, that's just going to be your LEA's total days of instruction. Otherwise, It's going to be the number of days the program was actually held. Whether you started it in mid-year, it's held every other day, every third day, then it would be less than your total days of instruction. So in the sample tab over here, we have program enrollment for speech and language. We have minutes as an example, 1 student at a time, 320 minutes a day for 180 days. For the Crosscat classroom, we're saying that it is being held 5 students and on average per period for 7 periods a day, 180 days during the school year. Now for Adaptive Phy-Ed, what's in here is there are an average of 8 students per period, but the class only meets 2 periods a day every other day. And in this case, since it's meeting every other day, this is a 90-day program rather than 180. Going back to minutes, that occupational therapy, we've got the units of service, and those should be specified in our contract with CISA. For the specialized bus route and the bus route to ODTC, those are going to be based on days. So if our bus route has 20 kids on it, that is 20 students per day over 180 days. And then for that bus route to ODTC, let's say 2 students share the ride, that's 2 students per day. Days and caseload function exactly the same way. The main reason to select days or caseload is to be more explicit and have better understanding of how you're allocating your cost. Once all of these numbers are entered, over here, it's going to calculate for that particular program cost what the daily rate is. So for our speech and language person, their salary daily rate is going to be $388.89. Their benefits daily rate, $166.67, based on the costs and the minutes that we've entered on this tab. Next, we're going to get to the student costs. Now, just like on the program tab, one student can have multiple lines. On a particular line on the student cost tab, you are either going to enter information for a program cost, or you're going to enter a child-specific cost. Do not put program and child-specific costs on the same line, and the cells will gray out, assuming you have a version of Excel that supports conditional formatting. Columns will gray out if you have selected one cost category or the other. Students are linked back to tab 1 with the WISE ID, so make sure that you are entering that correctly or copying it over. When you're entering a student cost, the program ID is what's going to go back to tab 3 and pull in the correct daily rate along with the unit of service. The average daily FTE calculation for the student is broken down here as well, and then the cost will be calculated based on that FTE and the daily rates from tab 3. So on our sample worksheet, we have this first student. Here's the WISE ID. The student names have been brought in. In this case, we're going to say that that student was receiving services from the speech and language program, the Crosscat classroom, and the specialized bus route. For this student, we're going to say that their speech and language services, their IEP specified 60 minutes a day for 3 days a week. So we have 60 minutes and 108, which is 3/5 of 180. Those two translate to 0.11 of a daily FTE. So the worksheet goes back to the previous tab, says speech and language. We have a 388.89 daily rate for the salary, 166.67 for the benefits. Those get added, multiplied by the number of days, scaled by the units per day for the kid compared to the units per day that was entered in the program tab. And that's how it calculates, in this case, a cost of $11,249.89. The FTE calculation and the multiplication are all automatic in the worksheet. You do not have to calculate that yourself. For the Crosscat classroom, unit of service is a period. We'll say the kid's in there 1 period a day, every school day. Again, the FTE and the cost calculation carry over. Specialized bus route, same thing. They're 1 student on the bus goes every day. That's where the specialized route cost comes in. So program, all you need for a program cost is the ID based on the unit of service that is being brought over from the program tab, how many units was that receiving each day, and how many days was the student served. One important thing to keep in mind about units per day is that they are for the student, not for the program. So for minutes, that is going to be the number of minutes provided on the days they are served. Periods are the number of periods they attend. Days of service, number of days the student was actually served. So this is how your partial, not every day, or partial year program is reflected. For the child-specific costs, this section is almost identical to tab 3. The only difference is there are 2 additional costs that can be listed as student rather than program. One of them is a cost for a placement. These are going to be external placements with some kind of tuition payment from your LEA to a private provider, another agency, as well as extended school year, because extended school year has to be specifically defined and spelled out in the IEP, and its costs have to be particularly identifiable. The worksheet we have for our first student, a one-on-one aid with their salary and benefits, got their woofer function, their license number, their salary and benefit costs. For these student-specific costs or these child-specific costs, they just go straight over to this total column exactly as they're listed. Placement, we've got a tuition payment. It's tuition to private school. Let's say we put it all on the grant. Again, that carries straight over. Here's the other student who goes to ODTC. There's their tuition. But let's say we also had to buy them an accessible tablet. For whatever reason, we didn't put that on the grant. So in this particular case, oh, look, I made a mistake. Tablets are not something that are aidable through another agency. That's okay. You can just delete that, move it to the correct line, and everything updates by itself. That's how the spreadsheet is set up to make your life a little bit easier. At least I hope so. Here's where that changing table has come into place. So we've got this year's cost from the depreciation tab. That $1,600 for the changing table, other local cost, went right here onto the equipment line. Specified services are non-administrative pupil services. So this does not include your director of special ed, IEP clerical support. These are guidance, counseling, health, and psychology services. This is the easiest piece of the claim workbook because all of the cost data is going to come from your PI 1505 SE special ed annual report. Additionally, for school districts, the enrollment data is pre-populated from WISE data. For other LEAs, the school financial services team does not currently have access to CISA, CDEB, independent charter school enrollments, so those will have to be entered manually. And there's a note on that tab that mentions other applicant LEAs do have to enter that number. This number of days enrolled for all students with disabilities, this is the same as your denominator for your attendance rate for your students with disabilities on your report card or in WISE Dash. So in this case, I randomly selected Lake Mills when I was at the beginning of the claim. All of their costs have been brought in from their 1505 SE report. There is a piece where it brings in all the health costs from function 214,000. And then if you had any individual costs for attendant care, specific nursing time, things like that, those would get subtracted out here. These all get converted into grand totals, divided by the days enrolled for all students, and then daily rates. Once you've got all the costs entered for program, child specific, and the specified services, the individual costs are going to be totaled from tab 4. Specified services are going to be applied as a daily rate, rates brought in from tab 5. Finally, to get the eligibility for a student, you're going to need certain kinds of deductible revenues. For state special education categorical aid, these are going to be calculated from tab 4, as well as from tab 5 for specified services. Grant funded is going to be brought in directly from the other tabs. Medicaid school-based services, though, you have to enter on the applicant roster. And this is the amount that you claimed for SBS for that child in the school year. Now, we do have a space where open enrollment transfers based on actual cost statements. This is where, rather than the basic $12,000 and some dollars, you have submitted an actual cost statement for a cost greater than that, up to $30,000. Future transfers will be based on that. Since that did not take effect until the current 2019-20 school year, it doesn't have any impact for 2018-19 costs, so that column is grayed out, but we are going to start collecting that following year. The thing about the deductible revenues is they are only going to affect your aid eligibility if they total more than $30,000. And this is another change from the way that we used to administer high cost. Under the old claim system, your grant funded costs could be part of getting to that $30,000 threshold, but your state special ed categorical aid and your Medicaid came off of the top. So those two things always affected your eligibility. Now, those deductible revenues are only going to affect your eligibility if those revenues are more than $30,000. So this is a change for the new claim form. And then the form will actually show that 90% of eligible costs, that 90% threshold lives in statute. So if we go back to the applicant roster, their individual cost 5, specified services has been applied as daily rates using the number of days enrolled. So as you can see, our partial year student has a lower specified services cost. These are totaled up. For the deductible revenues, all the students have some special ed aid eligible costs. They've all got some kind of grant funded cost, but you'll notice students 2 and 3, our 2 ODTC students, have the largest amounts of grant funded costs. Some of them have SBS claims entered. All of those get totaled up, but it is only the portions above $30,000 that become deductible. The aid eligibility is just the total student costs minus 30,000 minus whatever piece of these deductible costs are above 30,000. And then of course, there's the 90% amount. It also shows a helpful estimate of your aid eligibility up at the top. Of course, it's not a guarantee. Final eligibility will be determined after all claims are received, audited, and processed. The last tab on the claim form is the Finalize tab. The Finalize tab has a quick summary of what else is going on in your claim. Also has a space where you verify costs against what was entered in your PI 1505 SE report. There will be a side-by-side comparison. On the left are all the costs that you've entered in the claim. On the right is the maximum that any of those particular costs can be based on your PI 1505 SE report. And then the left side highlights in red if more costs are entered than were on your PI 1505 SE. As you can see, I randomly chose an applicant, so the costs have really no relation to what showed up on their 1505 SE. So as an example, function 158,000, I've got $1,800 in project 019 costs entered in the claim form, but the district did not have any project 019 function 158,000 costs on their 1505 SE, so that is highlighting as red. You're going to want to get all of these numbers to not be red before you submit your claim, because you cannot claim more than you actually had costs incurred. At the bottom of the claim, you're going to want to enter the name and title of whoever is the official that's going to be signing off on it, print it, have them sign it, and then scan this sheet only. Do not print the other tabs. Those are protected student information. Only the finalized sheet gets printed and scanned, and then the scan sheet gets included in your KiteWorks upload. So down here is the agency official. You enter that, print the form, and you'll be ready to submit. That is the new interim claim form. As we've been testing it, we've gotten some fairly commonly asked questions, so we'll go through a few of those. First question is, do our staff have to be properly licensed? As always, the answer is yes. That is true in regular special ed categorical aid and in high cost. How do I know if a cost is a program cost or a child-specific cost? Well, the answer seems a little simplistic, But in order for something to be a child-specific cost, it has to specifically and only be for that one student with disabilities. So if you have a cost that is shared by more than one student, whether it's 2, 20, or 200, those shared program costs go at the program level. They do not go at the child-specific level. So you're not going to be breaking up a staff member on the child-specific tab as 0.15 for this child, 0.15 for this child, and so on. Just put the staff person in the program cost. Do you have to list each teacher separately as their own program? The answer to that is no. A program can include multiple staff, multiple other costs, all of which serve the same disability-related needs. If you have a cross-categorical program at your high school with 15 teachers, 5 classroom aides, a supply budget, some technology, etc., those should all go under the same program with the same label. All of those will then get assigned based on the enrollment data you enter for the program and for the individual high-cost students. Do you have to list all of your special education staff as a program? The answer to that is also no. You only need to list the staff who are part of the programs that serve the students in your high-cost claim. If none of your early childhood students are reaching the high-cost threshold, don't enter any of your early childhood teachers. What if a student has one-to-one aid, but we staff that with multiple people over the course of a day? How you enter that depends on what makes the most sense for your LEA. But in general, if your service model has a pool of one-to-one aides, they all do one-to-one work, but they serve multiple students so that students don't have the same person all the time every day, it's probably best to enter those folks collectively as a program, and then each student is going to be a portion of that caseload for the program. How detailed do you have to get for a program's unit of service? Do you have to go back to enrollment records, attendance records, contracts, etc.? It's well after the beginning of the 2018-19 school year. The answer to that is you only have to get as detailed as it is appropriate and reasonable for the service. At this point, if it is unreasonable to go back to a daily schedule or an attendance record in assembling your claim, it is perfectly okay to use caseload as the method of allocation for a cost. For high cost claims, just to remind, we'll say this over and over, claims must be submitted securely with KiteWorks. Claims for aid to be paid in this 2019-20 school year, based on costs from last year, 2018-19, claims are due on May 1st of 2020. However, as of this recording, we have the evolving COVID-19 situation that is affecting both schools across the state and around the country, as well as us at DPI. So we have been and will continue to monitor the COVID-19 situation. And when it gets to be mid-April, if we need to reassess the due date, we will. Because of the COVID-19 situation, and because the claim form is only coming out now in mid-March of 2020, we're going to have 2 exceptions for the required information entered in the claim form. The first one is that we're not going to require license numbers. The fact of the matter is, at this point in the year going on, we're just not going to be able to check those license numbers. And the expectation this late in the year is that all of that licensing auditing is completed, and that'll get picked up in the 1505 SE comparison. The second piece is that if a program has multiple staff, you do not have to enter all of the individual staff. So if you're a large district and you want to claim your cost categorical program as a program cost, and you have 100 teachers, we're not going to make you enter 100 lines for salary plus 100 lines for benefits. You can run your payroll reports, claim a single line. You'll want to say cross-categorical teachers, 100 teachers, but then enter the total of their salaries, 100 objects, and the total of their benefits, 200 objects. For this claim, we'll make that an option. For future years, we'll have a conversation as claim forms come in about how we are handling those larger districts with larger costs. But for this year's claims, because of the timeline and the overall situation, large programs with large numbers of staff can have those costs combined. If you have any other questions about high-cost special education aid, please contact Rosalind Bidorf at the email or phone number shown on the screen. Thank you very much for your attention. And we appreciate your work with our children. Thank you.